My name is Fabio, as Alex mentioned, and today I'm going to talk about Scrum. So here is our agenda for today. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more. I'm going to go into what is Scrum, when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it, some of the roles and responsibilities, the events, artifacts, and at the end I will share some interesting links in case any of you are interested in learning more about it, and answer some questions if you have any. So let's start. So who am I? I'm Fabio, as I mentioned before. I'm a software engineer for about 2 or 3 years now. I have certifications from Scrum.org, which is more specific in Scrum, and I see Agile. Since Scrum follows the Agile methodology, it's always good for us to keep our horizons broaden away. So I see Agile kind of helps with that. So what is Scrum? Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems, as you can see on the screen. And this sentence I would say is loaded, so I'm going to expand it a little bit. Scrum is a framework. It's not a cookbook. It's not a step-by-step guide, and it's not also just a methodology or a list of values. It's a framework, so it has its rules, but it's not very clear on its implementation. Like I said, it's not a step-by-step guide. It generates value and not revenue, not shareholder happiness. It generates value, so a good product, through adaptive solutions, and that goes into the empirical process that Scrum has, which is we learn by doing it. The real true knowledge comes from experience. So we do it, we inspect it, and we adapt it to it. So that's where the adaptive solutions come from. And for complex problems, and here's it's very important because not every problem is complex. I kind of like this graph and the way that to categorize problems. There are a bunch of ways to actually classify problems. So complex are problems they are where the requirements are somewhat unclear and the certainty is somewhat unclear. So for example, if you want to do a payment service, if a client comes to you and say, I want a way to pay my bills, that is kind of complex because there are multiple ways of doing it. You don't know what exactly the client is wanting. You don't know exactly what bills they're wanting, and those requirements can change with time. So that's kind of a complex problem. There is also anarchy where you don't know anything. The client say, now I want everything blue, and now I want everything red, and then you have to keep redesigning your system a bunch of times. You don't know anything. The client doesn't know what they want, so that's anarchy. I don't know any company that works in anarchy. That doesn't work in the real world. And then we have the simple problems. So for example, let's say you have a document company that provide online documents, and your client says, I want this period removed. This is a simple problem. The client just wants the period removed, and you just go there and erase the period, and then there you go. So that's a simple problem. Scrum really shines on complex problems. The complicated problems and the complex problems, they kind of go back and forth. That barrier is not very clear, but just keep in mind that you need complex problems for really Scrum to give value. So Scrum has three roles. The very first one is just the product owner, which is just one person, not a committee, not one person and a helper, not some kind of board. It's just one person that has its role and responsibilities. We have the Scrum Master, which is also one person. And then if you're not a product owner and you're not a Scrum Master, then you are in the development team. So testers, technical writers, business analysts, they are all considered to be in the development team. In the 2017 version of the Scrum Guide, the recommended size of the development team was between 3 to 9 people. In the 2020 version that was released last month, they said enough people. But enough people to do what? It needs to be enough people that you can generate value, but not too many people. That coordination between them kind of becomes a hassle, becomes a barrier instead of becoming something positive. So that's why the recommendation from 3 to 9 people was there in the 2017 version. But people got too attached to the numbers of 3 to 9. There were some people that says, oh, more than 9 people is not, it's illegal on Scrum. So they took that out and say it's enough people. If you think you have enough people to generate value, but not too many people, that coordination becomes a hassle. Then there you go. You have a good size of the development team. So I'm going to start to explaining what the product owner's responsibility is. So the product owner, her or his responsibility is to maximize the value of the work done by the development team. And how he does that is by adding a clear description to the backlog item. So a backlog item is just basically a case, a ticket, a to do checklist or something like that. It's just one thing that needs to be done in the product. We're gonna call that product backlog item. So you need to add a description in a way that the development team knows a little bit what the product owner means when he wants that. When he say I want to add a payment service, you might not know all the details, but from the description you can kind of understand a little bit what the direction this is going to. Is going to add the business value. It can be numbers, usually are numbers, but it can be fruits or objects or anything that makes sense and is transparent to everybody how the product owner is organizing the business value to it. And it will add an order, and this is really important. The product owner will order the product backlog items in a way that the value of the work at the top will be the best. So if the payment service is something that all the clients want, they're probably going to go on the top. And if they want the remove, which is something that sometimes complex solutions have, but if they want something smaller, then probably goes in the bottom. So and that order is solely to the criteria of the product owner. So changes from product owner to product owner, from company to company. The Scrum Master, which is the other role, um, is the person that knows Scrum the most. It, this person it's usually called a servant leader. There is no hierarchy between any of the people in the group. So the Scrum Master is there to help everybody else in the company with Scrum. So we will help the Scrum team and we'll help the organization, we'll help the PO in doing their work better. So if they have anything going that it's kind of following out on the Scrum or it's not having the best value to the events or artifacts or anything like that, the Scrum Master can go there and remove those impediments and help them understand the goals of meetings and things like that. And it can even help the development team do the work or help the PO maximizing the value. Scrum Master is there to serve the team and the organization with Scrum. The development team, which is basically everybody else, they ensure the quality of the product. They are the people that do the work. So they get one to do item and get into a done working increment that will be released possibly in the future. They also plan and commit to the sprint goal, which I'm going to talk a little bit more later. And this is really important because they hold each other accountable for the quality of the product. So there are no managers there. Scrum is really about self-managing teams. So the team will have to hold each other accountable, will decide how to do the work, will be the ones that decide what they want to do next. These things are all responsibilities of the development team, and they coordinate a lot so everybody's on the same page. And to help that coordination, Scrum has 5 events, 5 formal events. The daily Scrum, the sprint review, sprint retrospective, sprint planning, and the sprint. As you may have noticed, I said the word sprint a lot. So what in the heck is a sprint? A sprint is a container for all the other events. It's just a period from 1 to 4 weeks that well all the work will be done. They will have a goal in mind that the team will do something that they want to do. They will decide a goal and they try to do as best as possible. And it is 1 to 4 weeks because in the business world, 1 to 4 weeks to kind of generate that innovation is not a long time. It's a risk that we can take. So if you take 4 weeks, for example, trying to generate a new AI program, and you say, okay, this is a promising thing, then that's good. But if you say this is worthless for us, then that's fine too. It's like it's a risk that you took and you might lose, but it's just 4 weeks. So sprint works as a risk control mechanism in Scrum. One important thing that I would like to mention in the sprint is that the sprint quality does not decrease throughout the sprint. Quality is the very first thing, is the most important thing that everybody is looking for, is the quality. And a sprint starts when the previous one ends. So if you have sprints of 3 weeks, after those 3 weeks, you're gonna say, okay, what do you have now? There is no, oh, we need a little bit more time, or let's just do this really, really rushed with no quality because the sprint is ending. There is nothing like that. Sprint starts when the next one ends, and quality does not decrease. So the daily scrum, because the development team needs coordination and everybody needs to be on the same page all the time, the daily scrum happens every 24 hours for the development team only. These are the only people required to be in there. The daily scrum is a meeting where the development team will expect what everybody did in the last 24 hours and make sure that they have the sprint goal in mind and say, okay, do we need to adapt? Do we need to try new things? Do we find any new barriers that need to be addressed? So the daily scrum is a meeting for the development team to to keep everybody on the same page, to kind of know what they're doing, how they're doing, and everybody to help that coordination that is required. The maximum duration of a daily scrum is 15 minutes. And that is because usually when you have a meeting without a maximum duration, they can go long and they go into like weird unrelated rabbit holes that do not add any value to the coordination of the development team. So the maximum duration is 15 minutes, no matter what the size of the sprint is, which is not the case, for example, of the sprint review. The sprint review is a maximum of 4 hours to a 4 week sprint. It usually this maximum duration is shorter when the sprint is shorter, proportional to the size of the sprint. A sprint review is where the Scrum team, the PO, Scrum Master, development team, and key stakeholders, it can be users, it can be support, it can be whoever the product owner thinks can have good input in the increment, where everybody gets together and inspect what they've done in the last sprint. So they will see what the result of the sprint was, and then they will say, okay, we now have one payment, for example, one payment way of like we implemented PayPal. Now let's try to implement Venmo or something. So they can inspect the implementation of one thing, and they can determine future adaptations to so that we deliver more value to our customers, deliver more value to our support group or users or anything like that. So the sprint review works like that. The sprint retrospective, a meeting for the Scrum team to inspect itself. So inspect how people communicated, how people coordinated, what process do we have, what tools do we use, and it's only for the Scrum team. There are no managers, no auditors, or anything like that. The sprint retrospective is just for the Scrum team. It's up to 3 hours to a 4 week sprint. It's shorter if the sprint is shorter, so proportional like the other one. The sprint planning is where everything starts. This is where the Scrum team will decide what they will do next sprint. They will also decide what the goal of the sprint is going to be, and this is attended by the Scrum team. But outside people can be invited if they have any kind of special knowledge that the Scrum team requires, so that they can plan their sprint better. Um, this is like I said, up to 8 hours to a 4 week sprint. If the sprint is shorter, it's usually shorter too. Sprint has like Scrum has three artifacts that are really important, and I mentioned those terms before, and I'm going to go into a deeper on them a little bit. So the very first one is product backlog, and the product backlog, I mentioned what a product backlog item is. So the product backlog items, they live in the product backlog. Product backlog is everything that needs or is wanted to be done in the product. Everything that a team has a to-do item goes into the product backlog. It's ordered by the product owner, as I mentioned, and it's committed to the product goal. And the product goal is a future state of everybody's happy 100% with the value that is being delivered by the product, where the maximum value delivered is being delivered to the users, and the product works great. Is oh my god, this paradise. This is the product goal. So the product backlog always has the product goal in mind, is committed to it. The sprint backlog is the junction between the sprint goal, which is why we're doing what we're doing, and a plan, an actionable plan on how to do the things that we want to do. The sprint backlog is managed by the developers, and it's for the developers only. They know how to transform a to-do item into a done working increment. So that the sprint backlog is for the developers or the development team. Its commitment is to the sprint goal, which is a sprint goal is just a single objective for the entire sprint. It's created during sprint planning with everybody there, and every time the sprint backlog will be moved, always thinking what's the best for the sprint goal. The last artifact I'm going to talk about is the increment. And the increment is just concrete stepping stone towards the product goal. If we were building a house, the increment was going to be a brick. That one brick that goes in there, that's the increment. It's done by the development team and inspected on the sprint review, as I said, and its commitment is the definition of done. And this term is really important in Scrum. A definition of done is basically a common understanding from everybody involved in the product, user, support, the Scrum team, PO, Scrum Master, what done means. And you can say, oh, done means I did the code. But it can be also done means I did the code and now I did security checks, and now I did unit tests. And that kind of changes of adding security checks and adding unit tests, it is inspected and adapted during sprint retrospective. This is where the team will say, our definition of done, what done means, is that the best way possible, or can we make it better? So this is where like the definition of done is really, really important, because everybody shares what done means. When I say something is done, everybody knows what that means. And that's why sprint retrospective is so important. If you want to learn more about it, I know I kind of rushed you through all the terms. If you want to learn more about it, I would start by the Scrum Guide. There's a new version that was released last month, as I said. Um, the Scrum Guide has everything I said in much more detail, all the responsibilities, events, roles, things to aim for, definitions of Scrum and things like that. So it's a really good resource, and it's not too long. So it's I would say it's a kind of a light read. It's not very difficult to read that. Then we have the two certification entities, which is the Scrum.org and Scrum Alliances. They do give certifications in classes and things, and they have huge forums with questions from going from like beginning level of Scrum to very advanced questions to day-to-day things in Scrum. What's the best way? People opinion, things like that. And I'll also mention that the Techlahoma Slack has an agile channel that we usually answer. So yeah, if you want to learn more about Scrum, I would advise any of these links is really, really helpful.